Hi guys, I'm Sam from the Unity of Life and welcome back to my channel. So, if you've been watching our videos recently, you'll know that we started talking about the history, the brief history of Formula 1, we looked at where the sport is today, and then we were going to move on to discuss some of the issues that this sport is still facing because they're not the most inclusive or diverse sports. So what we were going to start off with was the blatant sexism that's sort of in the sport. Do not get me wrong, they are taking baby steps towards trying to make the sport more diverse. We are going to look at these steps in another video, but right now what we're going to do, we're focusing on women that are in motorsports in general, not necessarily just F1. So the last two women we've talked about have had influences and have been involved in Formula 1 in one way or another, whether they've been some sort of driver or whether they've been the head of the team. So we've already looked at Susie Wolff and Claire Williams. So today we're going to be looking at Pat Moss. Now, if you've seen my Susie Wolff video, you'll know who Pat Moss is. I mentioned her, right? And if anybody else who you didn't say that and you think Moss sounds very familiar, well, I'll tell you why that surname sounds very familiar, and that is because of Sir Sterling Moss, who is Pat Moss's older brother. So we're going to be looking at Pat Moss because she was actually a rally driver at the same time as her brother was a Formula 1 driver. So let's get into this, shall we? Well, before we get too much into it, I'm going to say this, right? I really didn't know who Pat Moss was until I was doing videos, research for these videos. I was looking at female drivers and she came up, so I didn't even know that Sterling Moss even had a sister. And the fact that he does have a sister and she was a driver herself speaks volumes, because if anybody knows, because he was mentioned in the Susie Wolff video, he was a little bit of a sexist pig, and to be fair to him, it's probably partly because of the generation in which he was born and he was raised in, that women have a little bit less rights. But even though he was saying that women don't belong in Formula 1 and you'd never see them on the track, he then did phone up Susie Wolff to say that he wasn't including her in what he said. So, like I said, this is actually on his sister, Pat Moss. She is his younger sister. Fortunately, even though she's younger than him, I do believe she died before he did. But let's cover her story, because I didn't know she was anything about her, and her story is actually quite inspiring. So, she was one of the most successful female auto rally drivers of all time, achieving 3 outright wins and 7 podium finishes in the international rallies. She was crowned European Ladies Rally Champion 5 times. This is what makes this so astonishing and such a huge achievement for her, because these championships, these ladies rally championships that she won, happened in these following years of 1958, 1960, 1962, and 1964, and again in 1965. So why am I saying that like I am? Purely because in the 50s and in the 60s, women didn't have an awful lot of rights, okay? They were still housewives. I mean, some women, they did have jobs and they did have some careers, but it was still looked upon that you were expected to marry and become a mother, and when you became a mother, that was pretty much your whole world. You were going to look after these children that you produced. I mean, we were slowly getting into the part of evolution where you could go out, you could have a career and could still be quite successful and still be a wife and a mother, but it was quite unheard of back in the 50s and the 60s. So from her 1963 until her death in 2008, the Swedish rally driver Erik Claesson was both her driving partner and her husband, which I think is actually quite sweet, because she wouldn't have met her husband if she didn't go into rally driving. So, And the fact that they stayed together and they've stayed married for that length of time is actually quite inspiring in itself, because a lot of marriages these days don't last very long, unfortunately. So, she was also an author. So she wrote the memoir, The Story So Far, in 1967, and with her husband she co-authored of The Art and Technique of Driving in 1965. So that was before the memoir of The Story So Far. So she was born in Surrey in England. Now this is where it also gets quite interesting. To a British race car driver, Alfred Moss, and Eileen Moss, because she obviously married her father. She had a complicated maiden name, so I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, but anyway. She grew up in Bray, Berkshire, and was taught to drive at the age of 11 by her brother Sterling. Can you see what is so interesting about this, right? So when she was born, right, so she was 1853, so that means she was born in the back end of the 30s, I believe. Her father was a race car driver. Her brother went on to be a race car driver, and so did she. So one could say that racing was actually in their blood. It was in their DNA, and it was something that wasn't the norm for women to do in that particular time period. And the fact is that her brother Sterling, he was the one who taught her how to drive when she was only 11 years old, yet he was the one that was heavily criticising women race car drivers. The irony is, it's just, I don't know, it just makes it so fascinating, the story that this is how it happens. So, but she didn't start her sporting, she actually started her sporting career on horseback, so she was like a jockey, becoming well known as a successful show jumper and a member of the British show jumping team. Sorry, not quite a jockey. In 1953, when she was aged 18, she started driving in club rallies after being introduced to the sport by her boyfriend, Ken Gregory, who, ironically enough, was her brother Sterling's manager. In 1954, Moss brought a Triumph TR2 and started rallying more seriously. She asked the Standard Traffic to cover her expenses to drive her TR2 on the 1955 RAC rally, but they declined. Oh, I bet they wish they didn't. A more Aston MG cars offered Moss expenses and work, MGT and the works of the MGTF 1500. Thus began a relationship lasting 7 years, netting 3 championships and benefiting the British Motor Corporation with valuable publicity. As a BMC Works team driver, Moss had her breakthrough in 1958 when she drove her Morris Minor to 4th place on the RAC Rally. She achieved another 4th place as the Belgians Leroy, I don't know. My pronunciation of anything foreign is never going to be good because I'm dyslexic and I can barely speak English as it is, even though that's my native language. So, you know, I'm screwed when it comes to anything else. But anyway, it's some sort of rally that took place in Belgium in an Austin Healey 100/6 and won the first of her 5 European Ladies Rally Championships. In 1960, Moss took overall victory at this particular rally that we were talking about in the Austin Healey 3000, and went to finish second at the Corps d'Alpes. Again, could probably not pronouncing that right, in 1961. She finished second at the RAC Rally in 1962, and she was third in the East African Safari Rally in a sub 96, and in the RAC with the Austin Healey. Her biggest achievement, however, was winning the Netherlands Tulip Rally in a Mini Cooper. And they were actually quite mini and small then, and you wouldn't think that a Mini Cooper would be a wise choice in which to choose to rally in or do any sort of motorsports in, but there you go. Which Moss considered titchy and pretty unruly on the limit. This was the Mini Cooper, right? So in 1963, Moss joined Ford of Britain and managed 6th place at the Alcaros Rally. I'm probably butchering these word names anyway. In her locust turned Ford. Ford. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with these names at all. Anyway, so on the 9th of July 1963, she married fellow rally driver Eric Claassen. Ford tried to sign Eric instead in 1964. Moss switched to Saab to Works team to partner her husband. Together they competed in 11 international rallies. Her most notable results were the third at the Alcaros Rally and fourth in the Sophia League. I'm gonna give up with these names. And the RAC Rally. I appreciate that nothing I'm saying makes a lot of sense because I can't pronounce these damn names. But if you bear with me, that'd be awesome. At the Monte Carlo Rally, she came in 5th in 1964 and 3rd in 1965. In 1968, Moss joined Laceria. I don't know, to drive the new. Basically, it was a new car. She did not like the car's strong understeering, but nevertheless, she drove it to 14th place at the Monte Carlo Rally and 2nd place at the Rally something or other, losing to Paulie Trevor in a Porsche 911. Her other notable results in the season included winning some other rally. Basically, she went to a lot of different rallies and finishing 8th at one and 7th in a total different one. And in 1969, the Monte Carlo Rally, Moss drove her car to 6th place. I didn't make this easy on myself at all when I collected these notes. So in December 1969, Moss and Claassen, they had a daughter in which they named Susan, who didn't go into racing, by the way, regardless of the fact that both her parents, her uncle and her grandfather were all into racing. She certainly didn't go that far. By that time, Moss was becoming less active in rallying. She nevertheless joined Reynolds Alpine, drove her Alpine 810 to 10th place at the 1972 Monte Carlo Rally before finally retiring in 1974. So on the 14th of October 2008, unfortunately Pat Moss Claassen, she died of cancer, and she was 73 at this point. So she died at home, and obviously she was survived by her husband and her daughter. So I found an interview from the BCC, and it kind of sort of was talking about the Moss siblings. So it was like an interview with Sterling, and he was talking a bit about his sister. So in his peacock prom, Moss would blow kisses to women as he lapped them, but mentioned his kid's sister Pat, and the grand old man of British racing driver adopts a more constantly stance. So even though he was quite sexist, and didn't believe that a woman should be driving in a race thing. And you know, he was blowing these kisses at all these women as he lapped them or whatever. Once she mentioned his kid sister, he kind of yielded a bit and he calmed down, and he was like, "Oh, actually, what she managed to do was amazing." Which I think is actually quite the case with quite a lot of men that have like huge egos. You mentioned there, like, if they've got a baby sister and you mention them and the successes that they did, they dial it down her back because they don't want to upset their little sister, basically. So what Pat managed to do was beat up men on the roads of Europe at the time when some men thought it was a miracle if the woman could parallel park. Try blowing a kiss to a woman whilst you're choking on her wheel dust. I absolutely love that. I think it was the person who actually wrote the article that said that. I absolutely love that phrase. You know, because if you're behind the woman, then the whole blowing kisses thing to them becomes, well, it's not in the way that you intend at all. So Ross turns around and said, "I don't think she bothered about the differences." And this was when he was 85 when he did this interview, and he won 16 Grand Prix according to the BBC Spot. When the flag fell, she didn't just want to beat the girls, she was out to beat the men as well. So that's what her brother said. So the father competed in the Indianapolis 500 in 1924. Her mother actually drove ambulances during World War One, and she also raced cars. But eventually this overwhelmed her, probably because, you know, her husband's putting his life at risk driving and racing cars, and she ended up with 2 children as well. So somebody had to stay to look after them, and unfortunately it's more often than not it's the woman. Sitting beside Pat, however, all the way from Belgium to Italy and back again, was her co-driver Anne Wisdom, who in her right is also quite inspirational. And we're gonna cover why in a minute. And so the Anne Wisdom, who spent a lot of her time hanging halfway out of the car, so there was a bit of an interview with her as well, and she turned around and said, "I would say to Pat, I'm going to be sick." Says Wisdom. So that's why she was hanging out halfway out the car, because she wanted to throw up, and she would grab hold of me so I could open the door. It was a problem. So the reason I'm laughing is you can imagine Pat's at the wheel and she's driving as fast as she can. She's trying to beat these people. Her co-driver's telling her she wants to throw up and he's hanging halfway out the door. But then she's grabbing hold of her so she can open the door and physically be like fully almost out the car just to hurl her guts up. It's something that you would probably find in a comedy, you know. Just the thought of it is just absolutely hilarious, especially what they both went on to achieve as well. So Wisdom was one of the first co-drivers to be paid for her navigational skills, but nobody could accuse her of not earning her car. When Wisdom won the 1962 Tulip Rally in the Netherlands, she was pregnant. So, like I said, a lot of women, as they had sort of good successful careers, would put that on hold when they were having trials. So the fact that she, in 1962, was navigating in a rally car, wanting to throw her guts up, and she went on to win. And to top it all off, she was pregnant as well, and it certainly wasn't something that was considered the norm for pregnant women to be doing. But she showed them. And I think that made that victory just a little bit sweeter as well. So, Wisdom continued to say, "We didn't know we'd won it immediately because it was calculated. Pat banged on my bedroom door." Now, this bit's hilarious. I must admit. And I jumped on my husband, who was asleep, and started shouting, "We won, we won, we won." He woke up startled and punched me. I ended up with 2 black eyes. So not only was she pregnant and she won, she scared the living daylights out of her husband, who didn't realise it was her, and she ended up with 2 black eyes because he accidentally punched her. Like I said, it's just something that you can imagine happening in a comedy film, and it just, I don't know, it's funny. Because obviously he didn't actually mean to punch her, especially in her condition. He woke up startled, didn't realise it was her, and he was just sort of like protecting himself. So they, in brackets the men, so this is still wisdom, probably did think it was strange at first. 2 women in a funny little car. But once they got used to Pat winning, it wasn't strange at all. They expected her to beat them. Not many girls had the chance to drive for a works team and get paid, but there was no one as good as Pat. She was a brilliant driver. And I think that just says a lot about their friendship and everything, and these were 2 women that kicked ass. They did not give a crap that they were women. They were going out there and they were going to show them what they could do, regardless of the fact that they were women and they weren't men, and it wasn't the norm thing to do in this era. So Moss, who married the Swedish rally driver in 1963, continued to mix it with the men throughout the 1960s, including winning a specific rally in 1968, and also won 5 European Women's Rally Championships. But after the birth of her daughter Susie in 1969, Moss's racing career trails off, and she rode back to her horses, because I suppose horse riding, no matter what you're doing, whether you're jumping or you're racing, it's still a very dangerous sport, but it might be considered less dangerous than rally driving. I'm not sure, but this is what I've said. In this era, as soon as they had kids, they kind of the women unfortunately had to sort of sacrifice things just to make sure that somebody's still around to look after their child. So only one woman has won a world rally championship race, and this was Frances Michelle Monton. Apologies that I'm not pronouncing her name right. Who won 3 in 1982 and finished 2nd overall that season. The last woman to enter an F1 Grand Prix was an Italian, Giovanna Anthony, again, I apologise if I'm not pronouncing his name right, and she failed to qualify for 3 races during the 1992 season. So why we're talking about this, because Sir Sterling Moss had something to say about this. And Sir Sterling is undeniably proud of his kid sister and the trail she blazed in less enlightened era. He is adamant we will never witness a woman spraying champagne at the top of an F1 podium. I, on the other hand, would totally love to see that happen and challenge him. I know he's no longer with us or anything, so he was right in the fact that he never saw that happen, but that does not mean that nobody else is never gonna see that happen, and hopefully we can change that and work towards it. So men, this is what Sir Sterling had said, men can combat fear more easily and are better equipped mentally than women, says Sir Sterling Moss. I would argue that a bit. You're not going to get a woman competing with the best men. There's a cut-off point where a woman just isn't equipped to do that, in the same way men aren't equipped to have babies. Again, I kind of want to challenge that. Like, I know what he's saying about the babies thing, because obviously biology and the way that a man is built, they're obviously not designed to become pregnant, carry a child inside of them for 9 months and give birth. But the whole mental capacity, obviously everybody has different mental abilities, but all individuals, and I don't think that's anything gender related. So what would Pat have said if she had her big brother talking like that? So this is what he'd been asked. Somebody at the interview had asked Sir Sterling Moss, and he responded with, I think she would have have a lot to say, actually, says Sterling. I don't think she would accept it. She would always try to prove you wrong. Less a legacy, more manifesto. And Pat, this is what she said about her brother. She said, he teased me and we used to bicker like hell. So like most siblings, it's not unnormal. We never fell out of anything, but I was the pain in the backside kid sister. Mum would say, why don't you take Pat to the cinema? Sterling, her brother, would reply, oh, I'm not taking my kid sister. She's normal, it's just what you expect. That sort of thing. But basically we got on very well. We both loved ponies and jumping. And showing, and we went with our ponies to shows to have fun. If we collected cups and rosettes as well, it was a bonus. So that even though they had very controversial views on women driving race cars and rally cars and whatever, they seemed like they were pretty close for the brother and sister. And the reason I was like smiling at that and saying that that's pretty common is obviously I personally, I didn't have that experience of having a sibling. I mean, I was the firstborn, so my siblings would have obviously been younger than me, but I'm an only child, so obviously I've never had that experience of bickering with your sibling because I didn't have any, and I've got one cousin, but she did not live locally or anything like that, so it's really just me. So when I hear stuff like that, it always makes me smile and giggle, because it's kind of like, yeah, in a way I get to experience what it would be like to have a sibling through somebody else. But anyway, that's all I have to say on this video. So I hope you found this very interesting. Pat is absolutely a huge inspiration to women out there, and so is her friend Anne, who was also her co-driver. That they had some adventures, it seems, some really funny adventures as well, that you only sort of get once in a lifetime, especially when you have a very close friend like that as well. And they defined the odds, especially for that period of time as well. So if you've been inspired by Pat's story and you feel like other women could be inspired, then please do share this video with all your friends and family. And if you've watched this and you've enjoyed it and you have not already, then subscribe by clicking on my face. And when you click on my face and you subscribe, don't forget to click that notification bell. It will help you, and you will then be notified every Wednesday and Saturday when I upload a video, so then you never miss out. How amazing would that be? And if you want to know about all the other, like, my videos, if you want to watch them on Susie and Claire, then they'll be down here. And if you want to see all the videos I've done on F1, then you can click up on here. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.